New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Premier about the government's double standards. When that crane came down during the hurricane, the government was eager to step in to assume financial responsibility for the corporations involved, despite the fact that those major developers had insurance of their own. But the small businesses who've had to remain closed, despite the fact that they've had to keep paying wages and rent and utilities and so on, haven't heard a word about compensation, while the Premier has suggested to them just to check their own insurance. Can the Premier understand why people find this a double standard?
The Honourable Premier.
First of all, Mr. Speaker, let me say to the honourable member, we weren't eager to step in, Mr. Speaker. The reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, the crane operator Mr. Speaker, would require them to get that crane off that building. There were certain issues around indemnifying. That's why we're involved in this, Mr. Speaker, simply because of public safety, to ensure that we get that off. It was the reality of it was, Mr. Speaker, we will go back to recoup all of what we can through the insurances that are there, Mr. Speaker, but we believed it was in the best interest of public safety to work to try to get this crane off of that building.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, here is another instance of this kind of double standard. In Yarmouth, the government paid Bay Ferries this year $13 million, even though the ferry was out of operation. Meanwhile, the owners of the Lake Lawn Motel in Yarmouth speak about how they've had this year 1,200 reservations cancelled because of the absence of the ferry. Now, there are an awful lot of Lake Lawn Motel type operations in Yarmouth County right now, and the government isn't paying them 13 cents. So isn't it a double standard that Bay Ferries get something for nothing while tourism operators get nothing whatsoever?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it should highlight to the honourable member that when they cancelled the ferry when they were in government, it was a mistake, Mr. Speaker. That's the reality. What he's highlighting is the importance, Mr. Speaker, of that ferry to the tourism sector in southwestern Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
No, Mr. Speaker, what I am highlighting is a government that operates with double standards. Now, so much depends on what you're willing to consider. You know, the government is willing to consider, the Premier has told us, for example, $120 million in public revenue for a private stadium proposal. But what isn't being considered, it's been made clear, is a minimum wage that's anywhere close to a living wage, or housing programs robust enough so we don't have to have 20% of our people paying over 50% of their incomes out in rent, or enough support for young people so that we don't have the highest tuition in the country. I want to ask the Premier, isn't something wrong here somewhere?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it's why, Mr. Speaker, we've adjusted the basic personal exemption, Mr. Speaker, so those, Mr. Speaker, who are in the category the honourable member is talking about gets a bigger benefit. You would also know, Mr. Speaker, just signed a national housing agreement. We continue to improve the rent situation here in the city. We know there is more work to continue to do. The honourable member referenced post-secondary education. It's why we forgive the loans to Nova Scotia students, Mr. Speaker. Continue to make those investments so we can attract and retain young people, make sure that they get the right start, Mr. Speaker, in this province. It's why more of them are choosing to stay here now. It's why we've seen the growth of the population between 18 and 34, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, our population is going up. Since 1964, this is the first time the median age of this province has gone down, Mr. Speaker. That means more young people are staying and seeing a future for themselves. But the honourable member is right. We have some more work to do, and we're looking forward to doing it.